All right, so last up here, I'm going to cover probably one of the most talked about series this season, bar none, maybe the most talked about series outside of Sakamoto Days, right? Outside of Sakamoto Days, probably the most talked about series this season. It is Medalist. So this is done by Engi Studios. If you don't know about Engi Studio, they did Kakko no Inezuke, a couple of cuckoos, that rom-com series. The Detective is Already Dead, Kemono Michi, Uzaki-chan. I believe they also did one of the like season two's like Squid Girl season two or something weird like that. I forget. But yeah, this is Medalist is a manga original by Tsurumai Tsurumai Kaida. Sorry, yeah, Tsurumai Kaida. Sorry, Tsurumai Kada. Sorry, and this is his first published work, and the it got obviously adapted into this anime by headed by Engi Studio, and the staff is generally a pretty interesting combination. So we have Yamamoto Yasutaka. So Yamamoto Yasutaka is an relatively old time director. He did stuff like Valkyrie Chronicles. He did Mondaiji Tachi, Squid Girl season two. Working up all these series in the 2010s and so on. And he teamed up here with infamous Love Live writer, Kiwani Stronghold veteran, and just very prolific slice of life scriptwriter, Hanada Jupki. So these two are sort of the director and the script series composition head, and they teamed up with producer Koki Kanbei, one of the people down at Engi, to bring together this sort of mixed bag of up and comers as well as veterans and a decent number of people who are sort of core people within Engi, mainly from their work in doing Full Dive as well as Uzaki-chan. So a very interesting set of staff, but obviously with this they did a pretty decent work. So this is where it gets interesting. The voice acting cast is pretty much filled with a thoroughly veteran lineup. I think most of these names, if you are a longtime anime watcher, you should have heard at least a couple of these names. So we have Koshimizu Ami, especially in like the last like 10 years, right? So we have Koshimizu Ami, Ito Ayasa, Waki Azumi, Kato Emiri, Kino Hina, Ichiro Sekana, Koiwai Kotori, Koichi Makoto, Okasaki Miho, Ban Taito, so on and so forth. So a lot of these uh, people that are pretty much always in different anime series. So pretty much everybody should be recognizable by veteran anime watchers, except for maybe the main two cast members, the two voice actresses who are voicing the main characters in Akeura Jitsukasa and Yutsuka Inori, right? These two characters are actually voiced by the main character, the male character, sorry, is voiced by I believe Otsuka Takeo. So Otsuka did Aqua in Oshinoko, as well as Jinshi in Kusure no Hitorigoto. The Inori is the little girl in Medalist is voiced by Harase Natsumi. So Harase did most infamously Kaoru, one of these sorts of Genki lolly girls, the younger girls in Idol Master Cinderella girls. And where it gets interesting is the original creator of this Medalist manga, Tsuruma Maikada, was, I mean, still is, a super fan of Harase. And it got to the point where he not only created an entire like dojin and sold it at Comic-Con about how much he likes Natsumi and how everybody should like her and like all these good things and put him into a dojin and try to sell it at Comic-Con. But he created this manga Medalist then with the intention of having eventually it being famous enough, popular enough to get adapted into an anime. And so he wanted her to, if it does get adapted into an anime, if it did get adapted into an anime, he wanted her to voice the main character. And he
Isn't
made
that
this
what manga was that?
What
It was made by the dude who did Death Note.
the I forget. I think the second one, the other series other than Death Note, right? I think I
Yeah,
know what you're talking about. I forget what the series name is though.
but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Um, I know the
Bakuman,
series.
Bakuman. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, Bakuman. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Where the
Okay,
whole point of
yeah.
that
Okay.
dude is like, oh, I love this chick. You must. When I become famous,
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah,
must.
similar to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, it is very similar to that. Where this, so Tsurumai Kata wanted her, if if Medalist did become an anime, to voice the main girl, and this
But
theme
isn't the
of
main
Medalist,
girl a little girl?
yeah,
Isn't that
it's
kind
like
of
a
sus?
small,
Isn't
small.
that sus, my dude?
Well, Hatsune Natsume also does do voice a little girl in Countess, so I guess it fits. But it what's more, Medalist, this is like an anime based around, or a manga based around skating, right? The whole reason as to why he created a skating manga and did research is because Harase is into figure skating. So this is how ridiculous this is how ridiculous 2D idol, voice actor, anime otaku slash super fans can be, especially now. So eh, congratulations, I want to say, to Tsurumai Kata for getting all this done and I guess accomplishing his dream. But it is the story behind this is just ridiculous. It's actually unbelievable that he managed to get this manga and get it published and have the character set up such that his favorite voice actress could voice the main character. Is pretty silly. But yeah, Harisa Natsumi, originally voicing, mainly known for voicing Kaoru and Out of Master Cinderella Goes, is voicing Inori here. Osaka Taikeo, voice behind Aqua, and Oshinoko is voicing the sort of grown-up assistant coach in Tsukasa. So with that said, with the staff, I'm gonna go over the OPED real quick here. So OP is actually Bow and Arrow by Yonezu Kenshi. Some of you might have seen the OP or the preview with Yonezu Kenshi and Bow and Arrow and the medalist stuff in it. Pop up on your YouTube feed. The overall opening, the song, rather, is slightly reminiscent of one of his other works in pop song, but with kind of slightly unexpected resolutions here and there with the chords. The visual storyboard itself is very mediocre and boring. There's really nothing to remark about it. The ending is Atashi no Dress, Dress by Neguse. So Neguse is a four-man J-rock band with male vocals originating from Nagoya. Uh, Pretty snappy instrumentals, pretty decent, above average, I want to say, J-rock composition. The visual storyboard isn't very flashy, but the chibi form animations with it are done with a lot of care, and that alongside the snappy song make it an above average ED experience overall, in my opinion. And I think, well, this in itself isn't that impressive. I think there was obviously a lot of money poured into it, and I'll mention this again later, but like you're not just casually pulling in Yonezu Kenshi, right? So I think there's the budget for this series is quite considerable, despite it not necessarily being like a Spy Family or an Attack on Titan or whatever. Um, Going on over with, I want to say, audio visuals. The BGM is mainly on orchestral focus, based around sort of limited to mainly emotional scenes. I want to say none of the OST tracks are super standout, but there are interesting usages of these like piano solos and principal cello solo passages in certain tracks that are quite nice to hear. So props to them for that. Visuals wise, most of the 2D budget is spent on animating the standard slice of life chatting and facial expressions. So more vibrant stuff or more active stuff, right? Stuff like movement, for instance, skating and running, tended to be quite limited to a few select scenes, with the exception being episode one, where they just had like pretty much everything being super fluid and animated. But obviously, that was their, how do I say it? Their foot forward, right? The front. So they had to have that be decent. However, with that being said, with me saying that the visual budget is kind of limited to those being limited to those few select scenes, there is a good amount of consistency in terms of how many of those scenes there are spread throughout the episodes. It's not just one per episode, it's like one or two or three per episode. Again, indicating probably a quite a higher budget in terms of being able to do those, although it's not like those scenes last for an entire minute or anything like that. But they do have quite a few of those scenes that where they're doing all these skating tricks and flips and twirls and so on, and it's animated quite well. So this does indicate a decently higher budget, and again, this is why I mentioned it when I was talking about Yuno's Kenji being invited for the budget. So that is nice to see. The 3D blending is decent earlier on, and the balance between the 2D and 3D aspects as well, like when they show people a little bit further away, kind of skating in the skating rink versus when they come up closer and it's a little bit more of a full 2D experience, is done pretty decently, pretty well in the earlier episodes. I think it gets worse and worse in the later episodes to the point where in some of these scenes and episodes, say like 10 and 11, you see it kind of very obvious, like 3D modeling, kind of standard. Oh, okay, this is just they just have the 3D model. It's not really even blended. It's kind of out there, right? Like almost like one of those car 3D car models that you see in anime. So it's a little bit unfortunate, but there is a limitation to the budget probably. So um, that's that. And I would say overall, it's pretty decent. I don't think there's that really many complaints I could say anything about. It's pretty good overall, but it's not something that I would say, oh, this is definitely anime of the season. This is anime of the year, just based on visuals alone. So that's sort of what I think about it. Going over the story. So the story is Tsukasa, this blonde haired guy, one of the main characters, as you see in the poster art. He's a person who got into figure skating world much later in life, not like 20s or anything like that, but when he was 14 or something like that, and not like a baby. He got into figure skating. He got pretty decent at it. He went to like nationals and stuff, but he never really took off. Right? He was never an Olympic. He was never on the Olympic team. He was never, at least to himself, he was never destined for greatness. He wasn't sort of born into the right family. Right? He wasn't taken to the skating rink at age 5 and just taught with all the good coaches and stuff like that. So he eventually ended up being an above average skater, but ultimately now he's taking jobs as sort of an assistant coach for figure skating. He's not the Olympic medalist that he imagined himself to be later in life. So he's kind of there and he's kind of not very happy because he wants to be a great skater, but he kind of came to it later in life and he kind of has to accept that. He has to come to grips with the fact that he might just end up being a coach or whatever, right? And during that, in the middle of that, he meets a little girl, a shy fifth grader called named Yuitsuka Inori. So this girl is secretly trying to uh, practice skating, and she really is enthusiastic. But and she's quite good for her age, not a super genius or anything like that, but very, very good. And Tsukasa is enthralled by her and wants her to continue skating. However, her mother is against it because Inori's sister um, tried to get into figure skating as well, but later on even after putting in all this effort, she ultimately failed to become a really famous figure skater. Her mother knows what it's like to put in all that effort and still fail. And on top of that, Inori is not young compared to some of the other super young geniuses that get in at age 5, age 6, and start, preparing their bodies for figure skating and for Olympic competition and stuff like that. So it's a little bit harder for her to compete with the people that have been training for all those years, right? And obviously there are risks to it, right? You spend all this time and you don't get in, or you spend all this time figure skating and in the middle of it you get injured, and then what happens? So because of that, her mother is against it. And then there's this initial conflict, and eventually they convince her mother to let Inori get more into figure skating, try to do competitions, so on. And so a lot of the episodes afterwards, most of the story is based around Tsukasa helping to coach Inori into getting into these like different competitions. There's an expanded cast of characters who are also competing, interacting with Tsukasa and interacting with the little girl Inori, helping her grow as a competitor. And a lot of the theme is again based around competition and hey, I'm not a super genius. I'm just trying to really work hard. How far can I go? Kind of that sort of theme. So that's sort of again, most of it's kind of competition and competition is a very stand in that sense is a very standard sports series. But the part of the competition that the author tends to focus on is that sort of the variant, it's the sub-genre, the sub-variant of the whole work versus rivalry, sorry, work versus talent trope, which is, oh, I was just born as an average person. Can I really compete with these geniuses? So that's the sort of theme. Um, in the sports kind of part of this series with regards to like figure skating and they being taught about figure skating from Tsukasa and the other characters, there's decent amounts of surface level trivia. There's a lot of kind of nice and back and forth snappy comedic dialogue in the series that's really appreciated. In terms of the theme and the overall structure of the story, I would say it's pretty much the same pacing and repetition of the same themes with regards to competition and oh, I'm working this hard, but it's no use because talent is necessary to reach the top and stuff like that. So in that way, it is standard. But I do want to say that out loud. I do appreciate that there is a specific part of sort of this competition of sports and so on that the author honed in on and tried to refine the message around it a little bit more. So he really tried to hone in on sort of how far can you get if you weren't born with that talent, if you weren't born into the right family who pushed you into doing figure skating or sports at a very young age, and how do you deal with this? How do you grapple with this? What objectives do you want to achieve if you are sort of this average person in the world of competition? And there's this sort of secondary theme that arises where Tsukasa tries to emphasize upon uh, Inori this weight of this responsibility of choosing your own path to success because there are various risks and reward in trying to commit to different things, commit time, invest time into practicing different things in competition, right? So I think that's a big thing as well. So there's this like specific set of themes that the author hones in on, and that's very good, and that's clearly seen in this story, and I do like that. Um, there are other characters as the expanded cast comes in. There are other characters in the story with other standard tropes about competition in fiction anime, such as, oh, I'm gonna forge my own path, or there's only at the end of the day, no matter how hard you work, sometimes you just can't beat talent. There are all these like other average tropes that pop up that get pulled into the story and the narration, which some of these, like most of these are okay, but nothing that impressive. I do think in this part, the author is a little bit unused, not very used to the world of competition because his treatment of how the characters talk about competition in the anime and manga is a bit rough around the edges at times. For instance, there's this part where the Tsukasa, the male character, is faced up against just like one of these like Olympic super ridiculous genius skaters, right? And he the author ends up making this very ham work versus talent rivalry in terms for I want to say probably dramatic purposes, who are just like, no, you're a genius, but I'm gonna work as hard as possible and I will catch up to you. And it's this sort of how do I say this? Obviously, every in real life, everybody is very enthused about working hard and competing, but how do I say this? I don't want to sound cynical, but in real life, in competition, people kind of accept that there are just genetic gaps that, especially at the top level, most people just need to have that sort of how do I say this is setup, right? They just need to have it. Also, it is pretty much near impossible to get there to the top. And obviously that talent can come in many different ways, right? You can have the specific skill set, you can be a genius of hard work, whatever, but you do need to have it, right? So, um, some of that, I think, some of these descriptions of competition that the author uses in Medalist are not necessarily super reflective of how competition works in real life. And whether that's for dramatization, whether that's because the author is not used to it or didn't do enough research, it's a little bit rough around the edges. And I think it would have been a much, 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 much better series if he had really kind of dug into there and kind of created a more similar to real life representation of how competition works. Um, I don't think this is the way he represents it in this series is necessarily bad. I think some parts are just a little bit too ham and could use a little bit, just a little bit more tweaking. But I think overall it's okay to quite nice. I just think to go to the next level, there could have been some more tweaks. That's all. Uh, what else? I think oh, yeah, the mother kind of trying to make sure that Inori doesn't really get into skating because of all the risks associated with it. I think that was an interesting and uncommon way to have the mother almost as a recurring villain in the story. It's a very interesting structure for me because it's obviously not a direct, "Oh, I'm the director, I'm the stepmother, and I just hate this kid, and I don't care for what this kid does, and I don't want her to do XYZ good things." It's not that simple, right? So I do think it's nice that the mother who is sympathetic ultimately to the main girl, Inori, being a recurring villain is an interesting twist. But I do think again the response of Inori to the mother, the way she's like, "I'm just gonna be determined," and I think some of this is a little bit too ham for my taste. Overall, I would say the story is pretty, and I guess the anime. Overall, I think it's pretty decently solid all around. I don't think there's really anything to fully complain about being like this is a flaw, other than again, as I said, some of the aspects when the author describes competition is a little bit too much of the same old tropes in fiction with regards to competitive anime, competitive genres or sports genres or whatever. So just a little bit tweaks maybe. Um, I think I would have also appreciated a little bit more effort in creating the OP visual storyboard. So I would have something to look at, and it's not just, hey guys, for the opening, we had Yonezu Kenshi, so you guys should just watch it. I think that's a little bit lazy, right, Taste? Yes, I know it's Yonezu Kenshi. I know he did the opening. Thank you. You guys should work on the storyboard a little bit too, right? And it's not just having the people look at each other and be like, oh, it's this character. Oh, it's this other character. Just a little bit more, right? Come on, you guys probably had the money. Did you guys spend it all on your Nezukoshi? I think not. Come on, guys. So other than a little bit on the opening, um, on maybe just adding a little bit more thought to the overall competitive introspections and interactions between the different characters and then the expanding cast. I think overall very solid series. Um Overall, I think my Mal rating will be a 7.5 out of 10. This is quite a solid series for me. I'm not sure whether I would be like, wow, bam, this is anime of the season, or even, you know, eh, I've said this many times, but once it starts getting into 8.5, 9, 10 territory, it is literally approaching not only anime of the year, but potentially anime of the decade, landmark anime in history kind of territory. So I don't think Medalist is quite there yet, but I do think it is a very solid series that if you don't have something to watch this season, this one is not a bad pick at all. So Mal, I think the people on Mal gave it a 8.18 out of 10, which is very surprising, but it's just like a little girl. Yeah. Yeah, the time skip was quite weird. But I think this is pretty decent, but I think a lot of the higher ratings are just because it's a feel-good series with a little girl involved. So I think that's part of why the higher score is there. But again, there's nothing really for me to complain about where it's like, oh, this series is obviously not doing this right. But pretty solid series all around. I wouldn't say this is the anime of the year candidate, depending on what comes out. I don't think the anime of the year candidate, but certainly one of the better shows of the season, quite clearly. So, but yeah, that's pretty much what I had to say about Medalist. I don't really have anything too much to complain about it. Do I think it reaches the peaks of anime this year or whatever? No, we'll have to see, right? But uh, quite solid. But yeah, this is Medalist, originally a manga by author Tsurumai Kara, who achieved his dream of creating an anime where his Oshi, his most loved voice actress, would voice the main character. And pretty interesting, pretty nice series, pretty feel good series about competition in sports. So if you do like that, if you do like want feel good aspect, um, please do check it out.